A father promised to protect his daughter. But that night, the promise was sold, and hope was shattered. And out of the darkness, a stranger emerged, changing everything. We're just a few steps away from reaching 1,500 subscribers, and we'd be honored to have you with us. Thank you to every kind soul who's joined us so far. With your support, we share peaceful, heartfelt stories that warm the soul. If you enjoy calm, meaningful stories, don't forget to subscribe. You're part of this family now. Now, make yourself comfortable. It's time for the story. As the wind carried the scent of rain, Lena touched the surface of the water with her fingers, and in that moment, the silence inside her was broken by the distant cry of a single hawk. She loved moments like this. When the sunset turned the sky to copper, it felt as if the world had stopped and time moved only to the rhythm of her breathing. But this evening, the calm inside her felt as if it had been ripped away by an invisible hand. The thin line of smoke rising on the horizon had seemed ordinary at first. Then, as the smoke curled and darkened, Lena's stomach tightened. She didn't want to look back, but not looking was impossible. She shoved the small pouch of herbs she had gathered into her backpack and stood up. Her feet broke into a run, silent over the earth. With the wind against her face, she felt something. It didn't have a name yet, but it was dark and heavy, coming closer. Her instincts weren't wrong. When she crested the hill, she saw people gathered in a ring around a fire. The circle was tightening, as if pulled by an invisible rope. Her mother, Hannah, was on her knees, clutching the jacket of a man, Lena's father, Victor. The man who once showed her the stars at night and sang to her now had nothing left but sleepless, hopeless darkness in his eyes. Beside Victor stood 5 strangers, dust-covered vests, heavy guns at their belts, and a cold hunger in their eyes. The man in front was named Cole. Lena would learn that later, but in that moment, the crooked line of his smile and the old scar on his chin already told her enough. Cole tilted his head and looked her over, slowly, like inspecting a horse's teeth. "This her?" Cole asked, his voice rough like sandpaper. Victor's lips moved, but no words came. He looked away. Hannah stood with a sob and began striking Victor with her fists. With each blow, her knuckles turned bone-white from the force, but she didn't stop. "You promised," she hissed. "You promised you'd protect your daughter." Lena felt those words drop into her chest like heavy stones. She took a step forward. "Dad?" she said, her voice as thin as a dry twig caught in the wind. No answer came. One of the strangers stepped forward with a mocking whistle and grabbed Lena's arm. His grip was as merciless as an iron clamp. Instinctively, Lena dug her nails into his wrist. The man cursed, and Cole laughed. "A bright little spark," Cole said calmly. "Shines before it breaks." Then he pulled a small pouch from his pocket. The metallic rattle inside, coins, or something just as shameful, split the silence sharply. The pouch traced a short arc in the air before landing in Victor's hands. His fingers trembled as he tried to catch it. The weight seemed to make him stagger. In that moment, Lena understood. This wasn't a negotiation. It was already over. Tonight, she would not only bury her childhood, but also be dragged into a night where trust itself had no name. "You can't do this," Lena said through her teeth. "I'm not property." She locked eyes with Cole. In them, she saw an emptiness worn like a mask. "Not property," Cole murmured, "but valuable." A sudden movement. 2 men at once clamped down on her shoulders. Her mother's scream mixed with the crackle of the fire and rose into the sky. People shifted but didn't step forward. What held them back was fear, and fear binds tighter than any rope. As Lena was dragged away, she turned her head and met Victor's eyes. For a cursed second, she saw what was in them: defeat. And worse, self-loathing. They threw her onto a horse quickly and roughly. The rope biting her wrists cut into her skin. Lena clenched her breath between her teeth and could only squint against the pain. The world became nothing but the sound of hooves and the cloud of dust they raised. Everything behind her, the hearth smoke she knew by scent, the laughter of children she had played with, the evening wind whispering her mother's name, faded to a shadow in minutes. Cole rode ahead, each step of his horse heavy but certain. As she watched his back, Lena knew she had to make a plan. Plans were the antidote to fear. She breathed in and out, tasting the knots in the rope, memorizing the friction points. Anything could be undone if you knew it well enough. By nightfall, They reached a place scattered with ragged tents and weak fires, where shadows seemed to talk among themselves. The air smelled of sweat, smoke, cheap liquor, and an undercurrent of restless violence. When Lena was pulled from the horse, she didn't let her knees shake. Her eyes fixed on the entrance of a low, torn tent. Cole came closer, his knuckles passing so near her chin she could feel the air shift. He didn't touch, only marked the space. "If you bite," he said dryly, "I'll break you. But first, I'll polish you." The mocking laughter of the man behind him undercut the night. Inside Lena, the cold stone of her resolve hardened further. "You'll be the last one to try polishing me," she said softly. A brief spark of amusement flashed in Cole's face, gone in a second. Thrown inside the tent, the rope burned against her wrists. She pulled her knees to her chest and slowed her breathing, counting her heartbeats. Outside, songs tangled together, laughter flared now and then, and the clink of glass bottles dropped into the night like small stones. Beneath those sounds, Lena searched for a different rhythm, the kind that warned of something unexpected, a pulse that didn't belong. She thought of ways to wear down the rope, the roughness needed for friction, the time needed for patience, the slow twist of her wrists. Every lock has a point, and finding it is the first lesson of survival. After a while, the tent flap shifted. Cole didn't step inside, but his shadow did. "Try to sleep," he said. "Tomorrow's longer." Lena didn't answer. Satisfied with her silence, he left. As the quiet grew again, a thin, high whistle cut through the monotony, not the playful sound of a drunk man, but sharp with meaning. A few heartbeats later came a shout, then a groan cut off abruptly. The laughter outside died, movements changed tempo. The clink of bottles gave way to the click of metal, bolts sliding, hurried footsteps dragging in the dirt. Lena lifted her head. There it was, that other rhythm, finally. As the noise outside swelled, the rope's bite turned into a warm sting. She felt for the knot, tracing the fiber's path with her fingertips. Then she flipped her wrists, stacking her bones at the narrowest point. Pain brought tears to her eyes, but pain was proof she was on the right path. The rope gave a faint groan. Outside, a shadow sliced through the sparks of the fire. Another shadow followed. Then a single, sharp explosion, a gunshot splitting the night in two. The dull thud of a body hitting the ground was the earth accepting its weight. The tent flap flew open, and a big man with an old scar on his chin, clearly Cole's right hand, stepped in. As his eyes adjusted to the dark, he loomed over Lena. "Don't move," he said, or dash, he didn't finish. Because just then, in the slit of the entrance, a silhouette appeared in the firelight. The figure didn't step inside, just watched. Tall, with a rifle on his back, his stance was neither the swagger of someone trying to prove himself nor the jitter of a coward. Lena felt like she knew that stance, belonging to someone she'd never met, but whose story the wind had carried. A second gunshot rang out outside. The big man turned his head on instinct. In that instant, Lena forced her wrists again through the biting rope, and the knot loosened by a breath. When the man's gaze returned, there was a glint in Lena's eyes, not of escape, but of perfect timing. "Down," the man hissed, and just then, from outside, a voice carried a name into the wind. "Eli." Just one syllable, but enough to change the air inside the tent. The curse forming on the big man's lips was cut short as a shadow fell across the tent roof. A sound like metal kissing metal followed, as if a blade had parted wood. Lena slid back, freed her hands, and tucked her legs under her, calculating her first move. Outside, the camp was in chaos, but one person, the one whose name had been spoken, seemed to move not with footsteps, but with silence, rearranging everything. Cole's voice cut through the noise. "Find him. The one who moves like a shadow dash," his words drowned under a third gunshot. The fire flared for a moment. Shadows danced. Lena spotted a palm-sized tear in the tent seam. A narrow but sufficient exit. While the big man reached for his weapon, Lena crawled toward it. The fabric burned her elbows as it gave way. She stared into the dark. There, in the wind mixed with ash, a pair of eyes stared back. Not cold, not calculating, just determined. And in that moment, the night's rhythm changed completely. When Lena crawled out through the tear, the cold earth seeped into her palms. The night's darkness was like a curtain trembling with the orange sparks of the fire. Her eyes still locked on that pair of eyes, she instinctively started to rise, but the shadow-like man gave a slight shake of his head. "Stay low," he said, almost a whisper, his voice tucked into the wind's murmur. Lena crouched immediately just as a bullet hissed past the back of her neck. She whipped her head around and saw the big man standing in the tent's opening, a heavy revolver in his hands, fury swelling in every vein on his face. The shadowed man, she still didn't know his name, but there was an unshakable certainty in his presence, lifted his rifle. His finger touched the trigger with such calm it was as if time had slowed for him. One single shot. The big man dropped his gun as his knees buckled. Lena's heart pounded, but it wasn't fear, it was a sharp, heightened awareness. Every sound, every shadow, every breath was suddenly clear. He reached out his hand. "Come on," he said. For a moment, Lena hesitated, but between taking the hand of a stranger and staying behind to be caught by Cole's men, there was only one choice. She grabbed his hand. He pulled her up with a grip that was strong but careful. Together, they slipped through the shadows between the fires. Shouts, curses, the clash of metal, the muffled thuds of bodies hitting the ground. Chaos was boiling in the center of the camp. As they passed a tent, Lena saw a man lying still, a short blade buried in his throat. The stranger's eyes didn't change. Clearly, this was nothing unusual in his world. Who are you?" Lena asked, panting. He didn't answer, only shot her a quick glance. "Later," he said. When they reached the edge of the camp, horses shifted restlessly in the shadows. The man guided her to the nearest one. "Can you ride?" Lena nodded. "Yes." Wrapping her arms around the horse's neck, she pulled herself up. The man swung up behind her in one smooth motion. "Hold on tight." Then he spurred the horse. The animal lunged forward like lightning, leaving behind the echo of fire and screams. The wind whipped Lena's hair across her face. The rope marks on her wrists throbbed, but the pain had shifted into something else, the fierce burn of movement, of escape, of wanting to live. Looking back, she saw the camp swallowed by darkness. She couldn't hear Cole's voice, but that didn't mean they wouldn't follow. For a long while, they didn't speak. The pounding hooves, the smell of the earth, and the rush of the wind made even silence feel safe. Finally, the man slowed the horse. They reached a stream, where the moonlight lay across the water like a sheet of silver. He tied the horse and turned to her. "What's your name?" he asked. After a brief pause, Lena answered. "Lena." He nodded. "I'm Elias." The name settled in Lena's mind, not as a memory from the past, but as something that felt certain in the present. Elias built a small fire by the stream. His movements were quick, precise. Watching his hands, Lena thought about how little a person needed to speak to say so much. "Why did you save me?" she asked, eyes on the flames. Elias tossed a small stick into the fire. "I care about justice," he said. "And what Cole's done is at the top of my list of debts to settle." Lena's hands went to the wounds on her wrists. "My father sold me." Her voice cracked. Elias lifted his head and met her eyes. "Then you choose your own family now." The words landed inside her like a stone hard, but steady. As the night wore on, neither spoke much. Between the crackle of the fire and the distant call of an owl, Lena drifted toward exhaustion. But just before sleep took her, a sound came from beyond the stream. Faint, tangled with the wind, but it was a wolf's howl. Elias sat up instantly, his hand going to the hilt of his knife. "What is it?" Lena whispered. His eyes stayed fixed on the darkness. "They found us." This time, the sound came closer. A branch snapped. Shadows shifted. And Lena realized Cole's men had tracked them far faster than she'd expected. The air by the stream seemed to grow heavier all at once. Sparks from the fire scattered in the wind, and Lena's heartbeat lodged itself high in her throat. Without a word, Elias kicked through the fire, scattering it into darkness. Only the faint red glow of dying embers remained. "Up," he said, short and sharp. Lena sprang to her feet, but the mud beneath her made it hard to keep her balance. Elias, eyes still fixed on the darkness, guided her by the arm toward the horse. "Stay quiet. I'll see them before they see us," he added. Lena nodded. As her fingers gripped the horse's mane, she heard the muffled thump of footsteps approaching from far off. This wasn't the tread of one man. It was several, moving quickly but with care. A shadow cut across the thin strip of moonlight. Then a second. The third silhouette froze her blood. Not Cole's hulking right-hand man, but Cole himself. A rifle in hand, that familiar half-smile on his face. "Lena," he called out mockingly. "Miss me?" Her breath caught. Elias didn't answer. He simply stepped in front of her. In one smooth motion, his hands went to his rifle, holding it parallel to the ground as he shifted slightly to the side. Lena recognized it as a signal. Something was about to happen. Behind Cole, his men spread out to close off any escape. The moonlight gleamed on their gun barrels. Out of the corner of his eye, Elias counted 5 of them. None came forward as if facing an unarmed prey. They approached ready to fight. "Give her to us, Elias," Cole said. "Then maybe I'll make your death quick." Elias's mouth pulled into a thin line. "You," he said, voice low, "don't deserve quick." And then the movement began. Elias's rifle cracked once. The man on the far left dropped without lifting his head again. Lena flinched, pulling back toward the horse. Cole swore, his men returning fire. Bullets struck the rocks by the stream, sparking against the stone. Elias rolled to one side, firing from a new angle. The shot caught the man on the far right in the shoulder. He screamed, dropping to his knees. Cole's gaze flicked from Elias to Lena. Elias seized the opening and sent a knife spinning through the air. It buried itself in the throat of the man just beside Cole. Under the moon, the blood looked black. On the horse, Lena swayed, pressing her palms to her knees. Every part of her wanted to run, but something told her not to turn her back on Elias. Then Cole, roaring in rage, lunged. Elias met him head-on. The two crashed into the mud, grappling. Cole's rifle spun away, while Elias struggled to draw his blade. A decision burst inside Lena. She jumped down from the horse and ran for the fallen rifle. It was cold and heavy in her hands. Her fingers trembled, but her eyes stayed sharp. Elias and Cole broke apart for an instant. Cole rose and saw her. "You can't do it, girl," Cole said, baring bloodstained teeth. Lena leveled the rifle at his chest. "You'll be the last person to tell me that," she said, and pulled the trigger. The blast cut through the night like a knife tearing silk. Cole's eyes widened. Then he sank slowly to his knees. A faint curve touched his lips, or maybe it was just pain, before his face dropped into the mud. Elias rose, his gaze on her. There was no shock, no judgment in his eyes, only acceptance. "We have to move," he said simply. Lena nodded, though the trembling inside her wouldn't stop. Together, they mounted the horse. Elias jerked the reins, and the animal surged into a gallop. Behind them, the stream's edge lay in a pool of silence, stained with blood and mud. The wind slapped their faces, and Lena didn't look back. But she hadn't forgotten the way Cole's eyes looked as he fell. She didn't know if that look had been a warning that something wasn't over. And just as that thought crossed her mind, another gunshot cracked from far away, splitting the night again. Whether it was meant for them, or for someone else entirely, she couldn't yet tell. As the horse pounded down the muddy trail in the darkness, Lena's ears still rang with the echo of the gunshot they'd left behind. Elias's arms gripped the reins tight, steering with control at every stride. Behind him, Lena tried to steady her breathing against the rush of wind and speed. But this pace didn't mean the danger chasing them had given up. From the forest behind, the snap of branches came at intervals, not from a single rider, but from 3, maybe 4 horses. Lena glanced over her shoulder. In the thin wash of moonlight, she could just make out faint shapes. "They're not letting us go," she whispered. Elias didn't reply. He only veered off the trail, pushing the horse into denser trees. The pace slowed, but the branches and shadows would make them harder to track. For a while, all she could hear was the horse's breathing and the rustle of leaves. With a sudden motion, Elias pulled the horse to a halt. "Get down," he said. When Lena's boots hit the ground, he loosened the reins and sent the horse off into the dark. "They'll follow it," he said flatly. "We'll go on foot." Though her knees trembled, Lena nodded. They began threading through roots and low brush, Elias leading silently, Lena matching her steps to his. Now and then, he stopped, tilting his head to listen. Before long, the dull sounds of pursuit reached them. She could hear the riders slowing, turning now and then. "They're getting close," Lena whispered. Elias's lips twitched in the faintest smile. "They'll regret it when they are." His tone held no threat, only certainty. They reached a narrow pass, hemmed in on one side by large rocks. Elias stopped and turned to her. Hide. No matter what, don't come out. What if they catch you? She asked before she could stop herself. His gaze hardened. Then you don't hide. But that won't happen. Lena slipped behind a boulder, pressing her back to its cold surface. Her heartbeat thudded louder than her breath. Minutes later, hoofbeats and the rasp of horses' breathing closed in. The first rider into the pass had his weapon ready. 2 more followed. The last was one of Cole's men. She recognized the deep scar on his face. Then Elias burst from the shadows. The long knife in his hand flashed once before it dropped the lead rider without pulling him from the saddle. The man's muffled cry jolted the others into panic. The second rider tried to raise his rifle, but Elias used the first man's body as a shield, spoiling his aim. From behind the rock, Lena held her breath. It was over in seconds. Elias's steps were quick, his strikes deliberate. The third man had just swung down to run when Elias's thrown knife found him. He crumpled to the dirt. A brief stillness settled. Lena thought it was done, until another shadow stepped into view at the far end of the pass. Not Cole. Younger, quicker-looking, with a short-barreled pistol in hand. His eyes found Elias first, then flicked to Lena's hiding place. He came straight for her. Lena grabbed a rock from the ground on instinct, but against the cold barrel of a gun, it was useless. He smiled when he was close, but it froze half-formed. Elias had appeared behind him without a sound, wrenching the weapon from his grip and clamping a hand to his throat. As the man choked and struggled, Elias looked to Lena. First time you decide for someone, he said. Do you let him live, or? He left the rest unsaid, his eyes searching hers. Her hands shook. This wasn't just looking at an enemy. It was looking at her own limits. And in that moment, more footsteps broke the forest's quiet from farther off. There was no time left to choose. As the footsteps drew closer, the forest seemed to tighten around Lena like the walls of a trap. Elias still had the man by the throat, poised to end him with a single move. Lena's eyes flicked from the rise and fall of the captive's chest to the hard, unreadable focus in Elias's gaze. We have to run, she said, her voice trembling but firm. Something unreadable passed over Elias's face. Then he shoved the man aside and, without a moment's pause, grabbed Lena's arm and pulled her out of the pass. The sounds behind them were clearer now, the clink of metal on metal, the snap of dry branches underfoot. At least 5, maybe more. Elias led them off the narrow path and into dense undergrowth, weaving between bushes and low branches to leave no broken twigs or footprints behind. Soon, a massive moss-covered boulder loomed ahead. Elias motioned toward it. There. Lena scrambled up, Elias boosting her before swinging up himself. Beneath the rock's ledge was a deep hollow, dark and sheltered. Stay here, he said. Don't move until they pass. Lena folded herself into the hollow, knees to chest. Elias crouched lower down in the shadows, every muscle still, his breath controlled. Before long, the group's footsteps reached the boulder. 2 men hurried through first. They must have come this way, one muttered. The trail's fresh. The third voice froze Lena's blood, Cole's cold, cutting tone. If you can see the trail, keep your eyes open. That man doesn't leave signs unless he wants to. Elias's hand slid slowly to his knife. Lena knew what he meant to do and stayed silent. When the fourth man came too close to the rock, Elias moved like a shadow. The blade found its mark in the man's throat. He dropped without a sound. The others went on, unaware. From farther ahead, Cole's voice urged, move. They can't have gotten far. The footsteps faded. Elias looked back up to Lena and motioned. Now. She crawled out of the hollow and followed him, both moving fast and silent through the darkening forest. The trees grew denser. The light from the moon reduced to thin, quivering patches on the ground. Not long after, Elias stopped. We can't stay out here tonight, he said. They'll circle back. Then where? Lena asked. First, we wipe our trail completely, Elias said. Then I'll find somewhere safe for you. Before they moved again, Elias pulled a small leather pouch from his coat and handed it to her. Keep this. She stared at it. What is it? The reason I came after Cole, he said evenly. Lena didn't ask more, but the weight of it in her hand stirred questions she couldn't push aside. Why would Cole want this? And what made it so important to Elias? They walked on, and her mind was still tangled in those thoughts when a sudden noise tore through the forest, branches snapping, leaves thrashing. Elias instantly put her behind him, hand on his weapon. The figures that emerged from the shadows weren't Cole's men. They were more numerous, faces covered, their movements precise and disciplined. Lena's heart kicked into overdrive. "Who are they?" she whispered. Elias didn't look away from them. "The ones who make things worse. And you don't talk to them." The group spread out like a tightening net. The one who seemed to lead them strode forward, planting a short spear into the ground. His eyes locked on Lena, and he said just one thing: "She stays with us." The words dropped onto Lena's shoulders like a cold chain. Elias's stance shifted instantly, muscles taut, his hand sliding to the hilt of his knife. His gaze never left the eyes of the leader who had planted the spear into the ground. The forest was silent, but it was the kind of silence that swelled before a storm, thick, airless, heavy. The leader looked Lena over slowly, a faint curl forming at the corner of his mouth. "Keeping her with you will only cause trouble," he said. "We have a claim to the girl." In their eyes, Lena didn't see the crude greed she'd known from Cole. This was something sharper, calculated. Whatever they wanted her for, it wasn't random. But that didn't make it less dangerous. Elias stepped forward. "You have no claim," he said, his voice edged like steel. "In these woods, I'm the only one who will protect her." The masked men behind the leader shifted slightly, short blades and bows glinting in the moonlight. Each stood close enough to close in with a single leap. Still, Elias didn't step back. Lena felt as if she'd forgotten how to breathe. Her heart pounded so hard she was certain it could be heard. The leader tilted his head. Why protect her? For gold? For pride? Or? He left the question unfinished. The glint in Elias's eyes said more than any answer. There would be no negotiation. Then the leader ripped the spear from the ground and gripped it in both hands. It was a signal. His men surged forward. Elias glanced at Lena. "Run!" She bolted into the trees without hesitation. Behind her, metal clashed on metal, shouts cut through the dark, and Elias's breathing was deep and fierce. She didn't know how far she ran. All she knew was to keep going, even when her boots sank into mud. A root snagged her foot, and she pitched forward, landing hard. As she pushed up, breath ragged, two figures were already closing in. She scrambled backward on her knees, fumbling into her pocket for the small leather pouch Elias had given her. Instinct gripped her. This, somehow, felt like the one thing that could save her. One of the men lunged, but as she clutched the pouch, a small coin rolled free, catching the moonlight. The glint made them hesitate. One bent to snatch it up, and from somewhere in the forest, an arrow hissed through the dark. It struck his shoulder, knocking him back. The other man retreated instantly. Lena twisted toward the source. A tall figure stepped from the shadows, face covered, a bow still drawn tight. "Come with me," the stranger said, voice young but carrying the weight of experience. For a heartbeat, Lena hesitated. Leaving Elias now felt wrong. But the pounding of more footsteps told her she had no time. She followed. They wove through the trees in a blur. Behind them, Elias's voice cut through the night. "Lena, don't stop." It was both an order and a promise. But the forest trembled with the rumble of another fight rising behind them. And Lena knew now, this wasn't just about Cole or the men hunting them. She had stepped into something much bigger, far more dangerous. The last thing she saw before the trees swallowed the sounds behind them was the stranger leading her into a narrow, hidden path deep in the woods. Elias's voice, the clash of steel, and the enemy's shouts faded into the dark. The pouch was still in her hand, and in that moment, she realized the real answers might be locked inside this small piece of leather. But would Elias survive long enough to uncover them? By the way, we noticed something small. Most people who watch these stories aren't actually subscribed to the channel. Maybe we get caught up in the moment, or just forget to hit the button. But your support truly helps us keep creating stories like this. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel.